I think it's interesting with the Marlins because, I mean, they came in and had immediate success as an expansion franchise, which I can't really think of any team having as success as fast as they did.
Well, yeah, I can think of a team. It'd be the Mets, by the way. But to your point, the Marlins came in the league in '93 and won a World Series in '97. Only 4 years later,
yeah.
The Mets took 7 years. Okay, and the Marlins won another one,
and there was a strike season in there as well, and the Marlins won another one
in 2003.
6 years later.
Right, so they obviously won 2 much faster than the Mets or any other team. To your point about being the most successful expansion franchise,
and I think it's interesting because both of those World Series wins kind of just came out of nowhere. It felt like, well, more so the '97 one, the '03 one. You at least saw the starting pitching evolution, at least as an NL East fan, over a few years, so you could kind of see that team, if they got hot like they did, they could put it together for a year.
And they did it the same way, with having the World Series championship with all these high-priced free agents, and then tearing it down immediately the season after that, which disturbed a lot of baseball fans, including this one, that they did that because you like to see good teams sort of sustain that excellence.
Right, you'd always like to see the actual World Series champs defend their title the next season, and they definitely did not happen the next season for the Marlins because it was basically a different team.
But this maybe won't be the longest podcast because they've only been around for 31 years. There's only so much you can talk about with Florida. And as a matter of fact, they started as the Florida Marlins and in 1993, and their record as the Florida Marlins at a 47.7% winning percentage, so they're not very good, is unfortunately better than the Miami Marlins with a .436 winning percentage since they changed their name. So look, we talked about the Rays and said when the Rays went from the Tampa Bay Devil Rays to the Tampa Bay Rays, they got a lot better. So clearly the Marlins chose the wrong name when they went from Miami to
But it is interesting
Florida,
for
Miami.
For an expansion team that has 2 World Series wins, they also have the fewest postseason appearances.
Right, and they made the playoffs in the crazy, pandemic year, which a lot of people forget about because I think they had like a 30-29 record.
Which up until then, they had basically been thinking, well, if we make the postseason, we're locks to win the World Series because we do it every time.
And so one of the things I looked at is I they always say in Baseball Reference they'll have the winningest manager of all time, which is Don Mattingly there. Fine, but when you look at the managers for the history of, they've had a lot of managers in 30 years. They've had 16 managers in 31 years.
That's a lot of turnover.
That's a lot of managers and a lot of guys. Jim Leland obviously won the World Series.
Now, wasn't that some of it because they had like a lot of guys like fill in the same season, or did they actually have 16 separate?
There were interim managers, yes.
Right.
So no, that absolutely the case. And Jack McKeon came in, and look, Jim Leland came in before Jack McKeon and only managed 2 seasons and won a world championship, and then he was gone. So that's, just when you look at it from
weird.
far away. And Jack McKeon, the Trader Jack, came from San Diego and then at 70 years old in the dugout smoking cigars, leading the Marlins when they won their World Series in 2003. So the other guys on there are not super memorable names, but I didn't realize that Tony Perez had managed the Marlins at one point.
Only did it for a season.
Yeah, if it even actually he only managed for 114 games.
He didn't even make it a season.
Right. So and that's like guy named Brandon High, we know about him as a manager. He managed 1 game, so he counts on the list of 16 Marlins managers.
We know him as a manager?
Yeah. Brandon High, he managed in Baltimore.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
So and I just don't know why the Marlins can't get their act together when it comes to putting together a winning product on the field year after year. I think they're on the track now, and they have the only woman at both GM and the president of baseball operations, Kim Ng and Carolyn O'Connor, and that just impresses the heck out of me, and I'm sort of rooting for their success even more so because it's kind of interesting to see 2 women running the field, running the team, from the front office.
And as we were saying, they've had a much better season this season. They've had an unbelievable year from Jorge Soler, though it's unfortunate that there's a good chance we won't be seeing him anymore with that injury he just had.
Yeah, what a heck of a pickup, and I wouldn't have bet on that. I mean, somebody who said you want Jorge Soler, it might not have.
They're doing this with a year from Jazz Chisholm that has not been as good as you would have hoped for.
I told you how much I like that player, and I completely agree with you that his he hits pretty big home runs.
Now, It's unfortunate. It's interesting that they didn't bring Yuri Perez back up for September, just on the off chance that, well, if they make the
Well, they did bring him back.
right, they did.
Yeah, they did bring him back.
Oh, okay, because if they make the playoffs, you'd want him there.
Yeah,
for
they
that.
did bring him back in time to pitch, and I think they're trying to manage his innings through the end of the year.
Oh, yeah.
Which is obviously
But he
smart
just needs to be on the roster.
for a young pitcher. So we'll go through, and one of the things about the Marlins that I think is really interesting is that if you look at their players by WAR, and we're not going to go through them one by one. The number one Marlin by WAR is Giancarlo Stanton. He hasn't played there in a very long time.
Well, I mean, but that makes sense because who's been good that's been there since then.
And so that he was able, but he wasn't a Marlin for a super long time either.
Right,
so
but he only probably needed to have a couple really good seasons.
Who are your really long-term Marlins that have had?
There hasn't been anybody that you could really think of that's like been a great player
I can
and
think
a
of one.
long-time Marlin.
Well, maybe not a great player, but I think one of the most favorite Marlins of all time, and I don't know if you'll remember this guy, Jeff Conine.
Oh, yeah.
That Marlins fans love this guy because he loved being a Marlin and all that stuff. And I would say that he's probably the most beloved Marlin.
Right, but the thing is he was not an elite player for like 4 seasons like Stanton was.
I don't know that he was ever an elite player.
Right,
period.
exactly. Stanton had a couple titanic years for them,
59
including an
home
MVP.
runs, right? He had a 59 home run season for them.
Right.
So that's kind of special, and then that's why he'll be at the top of the list, at least in terms of home runs for that team, because home run hitters don't abound.
Right. And Miguel Cabrera really didn't become Miggy until he left the Marlins. You know, he was a up and coming young player, but he was a true.
He had that World Series though.
Right.
Where he contributed big when they beat the.
But then he became a superstar. I feel like when he went to Detroit.
Yeah, and so he left it in Marlins. And Marlins, they have a weird thing. So as a Met fan, right, we talk about no hitters and how they didn't have one until Johan Santana, and then they had the combined one. But in the whole history of the franchise now, we couldn't have said this 10, 11 years ago, they had none. The Marlins have 6 no-hitters. That's just weird.
One every 5 years.
31 years. Al Leiter, Kevin Brown. So we got some really good pitchers. A.J. Burnett, Henderson Alvarez, Edinson Volquez. I mean, that's...
Annabelle Sanchez,
right? And so these are names that we know. They're not like, sometimes you get no-hitters from guys like, this guy threw in, remember the guy for the Giants who threw one against the Mets? It's not Chris Stratton. He threw a no-hitter, or Henson. Chris Henson, he's not even in baseball anymore, but he threw a no-hitter against the Mets. That happens a lot where the guy just has a day.
Right.
But the Marlins pitchers were really good pitchers and
they've had pretty good pitching. That's always been a theme with
pitching's
that
been
team.
a hallmark for that team. I agree. And at this point, I think they have some really good young pitching in addition to Yuri Perez, because Sanchez is a good pitcher.
Sandy Alcantara won the Cy Young last year. He's had a bit of a down year this year, but I got to think he's got arm fatigue from last year. I think that has.
Yeah. Well, he's thrown about 1 billion innings. Remember throwing all the complete games at the end of last season. And I think the pitch clock is starting to have an effect. And maybe it's just because I want to believe this, maybe a little bit. That the collective effect of pitching on a faster cadence by the time you get to September could see some weird injuries happen at the end of the year.
Right, but Alcantara, he's been a little up and down.
Hasn't had a great season, certainly compared to last year.
So I think we have to see how September plays out before we attribute anything to the pitch clock here.
Right, but I think you're seeing guys, all of a sudden come up a little lame late in the season.
Right, but
you just don't know.
But you don't know because you'd have to look. I bet if you looked at last year, guys got hurt in September too, and it's just easy to attribute.
I don't know
it to
that
the
the evidence
clock.
will ever be able to be clear enough to be able to make that conclusion.
You would need to have like 10% more arm injuries in September over the course of like 5 seasons for you to start being like, okay, clearly there's a link here.
Yeah, but
1 year would not prove it.
You can't draw conclusions. I think about the empty ballpark when you ever watch the Marlins on TV. It always seemed. Remember before they have a roof on the park now.
Yeah.
So in the old days they had to start the games because it rained like every night in there. They had all kinds of problems with rain out. So they've got this nice ballpark, but they've only drawn 3 million fans, and that they even did draw 3 million fans amazed me. And that was in their first season, and they haven't even reached any more than 2.2, other than 2 all times for the rest of their history.
I mean, even when they've been good this season, they haven't really drawn. Maybe if they get hot and they're on a playoff run late now in September, they start getting a lot of people showing up as they make that final playoff push. But I think that they just suffer from being in a city where there's better things to do.
Well, and a team that doesn't win enough to get the fans really excited. Like Tampa, you thought, well, that's not a great baseball town. The Rays have been good for a long time. Fans show up. That stadium gets loud when they play.
Now that they've had a
playoffs.
culture of winning for a bunch of seasons in a row, there's a fan base. And the Marlins, because not only are they in a town where there's a ton to do, but they've basically stunk most seasons with a .430 winning percentage. Who's going to really get behind? You're not going to root for that team unless you're already a giant baseball fan that happens to be in Miami.
And it's the weird Derek Jeter thing, right? So they bring him in there and make him president of baseball operations, I think, way back when.
Or something like that.
And so he brings in Kim Ng, which he knew her from the Yankees organization. And then he abruptly leaves and just says the organization doesn't have the same vision as I have, which if you're thinking of Derek Vision, his only vision is winning.
Hey, but who knows? That's the thing. Who really knows what went on?
They wouldn't spend the money on the players he wanted to keep. You don't know exactly the reason.
Did he just realize? Wait a second, this is way more involved than I wanted to get.
I don't really want to be a GM or a baseball operations
Pobo.
guy. I think that's a good point to say that. You know what? I don't like this as much as I thought I was going to like this.
Right. They have a different vision for what my role within this organization was going to be.
And I'm freaking Derek Jeter, and I don't have to do this if I don't want to.
Exactly. You just don't know. It could be that. It could be that. Yeah, they really just didn't want to spend the money, and he didn't want to be on a team that wasn't willing to go pay for free agents or something.
So I don't know there's much I can say. We can talk about a little bit of the Marlin players, in the past. But as I told you about when I looked at the WAR numbers, it seemed like to be Hanley Ramirez is on there as a guy who he was a good, really good player when he played for the Marlins. But he didn't play there long enough to accumulate any significant WAR. And you go through their list of players.
How much WAR did Stanton have for the Marlins?
I will pull that up and
just because it gives you an idea. If he's number one, right, and he's got such a low number, whatever it is, then it's really tough to
35-7.
35-7. That's actually pretty good.
That just shows you how big those years were.
Right, and that shows you how good he was for them. So 35-7 is actually a pretty meaningful amount of WAR. To me, it's not until you get the guys that have like 10 WAR.
And Hanley Ramirez is number 2 with 26. So that's just it.
But that's a steep drop off between 1 and 2.
And who's third in all time WAR for? Don't guess. Josh Johnson.
Oh, the pitcher.
Right. That's how you say it. Oh, the pitcher. Right. I knew he pitched, and he was a good pitcher.
Yeah. What's his WAR?
25.7.
Wow, for his career, because he was mostly with them, I believe.
Luis Castillo, not the pitcher, Luis Castillo, the drop the fly ball to lose the Yankee game. Luis Castillo
still haunts.
Yeah, that guy. It still haunts. You're right. And Dontrell Willis. Now, did you watch Dontrell Willis play?
D-Train.
What a fun guy to watch.
Right,
pitch.
he came up like a flash of lightning, but then he lost his control at some point and was just never the same pitcher.
Yeah, you're looking at his career. I was surprised because he only pitched 9 years in the big leagues, and I guess I thought I know he left and he went to Detroit and Cincinnati.
Once he went bad at one point, and then he just never figured it out.
But he was
again.
a dynamic and really wonderful guy to watch. Pitch, a lot of fun, not to hit against. At the time because he was a pretty tough guy. So I don't think we need to dig any more deeper into the Marlins past because for the fans of the Marlins, they know
it's about this year.
These guys, and it's about this year and making their own history.
So do you think they do? Do you think they managed to grab one of those last wild card spots?
I don't. I just think the loss of Alan Contra probably makes them better off not making it because wouldn't you hate to go into the playoffs and not have that guy?
It would stink for them because if you had him and Yuri Perez, you'd actually give yourself
make other teams a little nervous.
Right, you'd give yourself a puncher's chance in a short series.
No, I don't think that they will. But if you had to ask me, am I super confident that the Reds or the Diamondbacks are going to do it too?
No, they're right there in there.
I don't know. All those teams could trip and fall.
And you have to be thinking as a Marlin fan, if it's not a COVID year and we make the playoffs, probably going to win the World Series.